back to some segments, I do record the actual sessions that we go through together. So they're there for your convenience. All right. We are in chapter 6, and we're breaking up this chapter. It's a pretty big, heavy chapter. There's a lot of information in it. So some chapters are more, there's a lot of information throughout this book, period. Okay. And a lot of it is very helpful. Some of it is very general. Some of it is very specific. And so I feel like this chapter is worthwhile. The kind of detailed information that it offers and the kind of value that it offers. It's not just informational. We're not just learning a lot. We're actually learning how to understand a lot. And so I felt like it's prudent to break it up, which is why we're doing session on chapter 6 this week, and then session on the second part next week, because it's just kind of, just too much to cover all at once. All right. So chapter 6, cultural values, roadmaps for behavior. If you haven't figured this out, we fall into these predictable patterns, essentially. All of us do as people. And our cultural values kind of lay out a path for us of how we behave, how we live life, what we do in life. And many of us just simply follow those paths a lot of times without asking questions at all. We just do what we do because that's what everybody else does, or that's what's expected of us to do. And we just know that this is right and this is wrong, and we go along and we do it. And we rarely ask questions of why we do what we do. And we rarely ask questions why other people don't do the same things that we do. And so this is what this chapter is about. It's about behavior. Why do we as humans, as different as we may be, behave differently from people to people, culture to culture, and sometimes even person to person? Okay. So we've talked about how our family history, for example, how our national history, how our religion and our own cultural identity all affect the decisions that we make in everyday life. These are the building blocks of culture, if you think about it. They basically tell us what to do. Either you're guided by, this is what you learned from your parents, or you're guided, but this is what your religion tells you to do, or you're guided in some other way, shape, or form. But somebody is providing a pattern for you to live your life. And when you recognize that pattern, you realize that you are following a cultural trend. You're following a cultural pathway. So, and this includes big things. This includes little things. It could be little things like deciding on a name or something like that for your child, or maybe that's big for your culture. For some cultures, that's a huge thing. For other cultures, it's not a big deal. People name kids, hey, I like this Hollywood actor, let me name my child based on that, or something like that. Or with other cultures, it's all about family. So you can only use family names. You can't just go out and decide to name your child whatever you want to name them, So it could be little things, it could be big things. It could be little thing like, what do you have for breakfast? In some countries, they are very heavy with breakfast. In other countries, they're very light with breakfast. Why? The answer is culture. In some cultures, they eat certain types of things, heavy protein or heavy starch. In other cultures, they don't. Times of day when you eat, things like that. It's all driven by our environment, our culture, what we learned, what people around us do, and we just follow suit. So, that's understandable. So much of our behavior, is something that we learn. And much of it is also connected to our perception of the world. How we understand the world and how we interpret it and how we say, this is how I want to live this life, this is how I fit in this world. It's really driven by our culture. And all questions in life essentially become dependent and contingent on those cultural views, your worldview, what you think the world is and how you think the world works becomes um, a guide for you to answer all questions in life. Okay. I mean, anything that a person has to make a decision on will be guided by your worldview, essentially. And so your worldview is a number of things, and among them, as we studied, your family history and your religion and your own identity. How do you see yourself? Much of that is, plays into it. So today, as we look at this chapter, there's a discussion that the authors have included for us that talks about perception. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And it's really important because as we study cultures, it really is our ability to recognize and to prepare for, and sometimes to manage some sort of a cultural, conflict, as we will have value conflicts. You understand that your culture is your culture, and other people have other cultures, and they will conflict because they see the world differently from you. And so you will run into disagreements, sometimes really big disagreements, and you will not understand other people, and you will get frustrated with them why they don't do, what you think they should be doing, or why they do what you think they should be doing in a completely different way. So you will have conflicts. You'll have conflicts at work. You'll have conflicts in your friendships. You'll have conflicts in school. All sorts of misunderstandings. And it's your ability to recognize these things and your ability to manage these things, be ready for them, essentially, is what studying intercultural communication is all about. It's knowing how to deal with these things, learning how to communicate through this maze of confusing, contradicting perspectives. So being aware of other people's cultural values prepares you. This is why we're studying these things. Being aware, knowing that this is what's, out there, you're basically already know that at some point you're going to have to deal with this. So that's why studying communication methods that kind of help you work through that is so important. So today we're going to look at how culture shapes perception. We're going to look at some of the beliefs and cultural values, and then we're going to look at how culture kind of sees those values within themselves and what they do with those values. So first is a brief discussion on perception. I hope that you realize that not everyone perceives everything in the same way. We don't look at things the same because our perception is guided by culture. Okay, we have basically engage, all of us as humans, because we live in a world that is so complicated. We engage in a perceptive process, and the authors describe this process on page 200 in your textbook. It's a 3-step process. Its first step is selection, second step is organization, and third step is interpretation. Basically, what we do is we don't perceive everything there is to perceive. We live in a world that is so big, so complicated. We only pay attention to that which we think we need to pay attention to. Honestly, that's really how it is. You can't perceive everything, because if you perceived everything, your head would explode. Your brain can't handle it. Okay, so what we do to save our brains from exploding, we choose. We pick what we think is important or interesting or curious or weird or strange or whatever, something that basically gets our attention. So some things we pay attention to, other things we don't pay attention to. We ignore it, and it's almost like automatic. We don't always, even realize we're doing it. So essentially, we have this process of selection. And then once we have selected something that we are perceiving or trying to understand, focusing on, and this could be event or person or a thing, sort of say, then we move on to organizing it. We categorize it. We try to put values on it. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it helpful? Is it not helpful? Do I need this? Do I not need this? Am I interested? Am I not interested? We put it into a category. We put it into a box. Essentially, we have all these categories that we have developed in our head, where we say, "Oh, this is like this," and we basically assign it to that category. We have to make sense of whatever it is that we are perceiving, whether it's a person or a thing or an idea, or some experience. We're always going to put it in a category in our head, essentially, and then we interpret it. Then we say, okay, therefore, this is good, this is bad, this is, that's we judge it. Is this something I want to be involved in, something I don't want to be involved in? We try to interpret it based on our reality, on our understanding of the world. We interpret it based on our culture, our perception, our sort of say cultural patterns. So this explains why the same two people that are very different will receive the same exact scenario, the same exact situation, but how they will react, it will be completely different. Okay, like you can ask them the same question, they'll answer it in a completely different way, or you can give them something and they will react to that item in a completely different way, because they're being guided by their worldview, how to react in this particular situation, what to do with this situation. So lots of factors go into our perception. It could be, just, but mainly a lot of it is our culture. Let's put it that way. And how we understand each other is also shaped on our culture. So, for example, if you value honesty and directness, if you really, like for people to say things just the way they are, then when you meet a person from a culture that does not like to speak directly, likes to communicate in a more indirect way, they don't like to just tell you how it is. Why? Because they don't want to be offensive. They want to be polite. They want to give you a way out. Then you're going to say, well, that person does not give me a straight answer. This person does not talk, straightforward. I don't know that I can trust them. They're being duplicitous. They're hiding something. They're not answering my question. A person asks another person, all right, so tomorrow I'll see you at 2:00, right? And the person says, okay. And another person would say, oh yeah, sure, 2:00, see you there. Great, very easy. For somebody who's speaking direct, they're happy. A person who has an indirect style of communication is going to say, all right, see you tomorrow at 2:00. And they're going to say, all right, Lord willing, or something like that. Or perhaps, or maybe. And you're like, no, I don't want maybe. I want yes. I'll see you at 2:00. And you're like, maybe, if it works out. And you're like, no. And this is the two differences. The two differences, one person wants a way out. They don't want to commit to 2:00, because if they don't show up at 2:00, they're going to feel bad. They're going to feel embarrassed, whatever, something, or if something that happened, they don't want to commit, essentially. And another person wants a commitment, and both of them still want to meet. It's just how they express that commitment to a meeting is different. A person who values time, who counts time in seconds and minutes, for them 2:00 is 2:00, not 2:05, not 2:15. Another person who doesn't look at time the same way, To them, 2 o'clock is 2:15, 2:30, 2:45, maybe 3 o'clock. Who cares? Sometime after 1, basically. And that these are differences of culture, and how we communicate, how we express those things. We now evaluate each other. Essentially, we make judgments about each other based on how we express these values. So it really all depends. Perception is essentially a process. There's several observations that the authors give us about perception on page 201. I hope you noticed them. Perception is selective, meaning we choose and we pick and choose what we want to notice, what we don't want to notice. Sometimes we don't notice things because our culture teaches us not to notice them, okay? Or because we don't find them to be important. And perception is learned. We learn how to perceive, what to focus on, what becomes important to us versus what's not important. It is culturally determined because culture teaches us what things mean. If you see a person dressed a certain way, your culture tells you judge them this way, or think of them that way, or person dressed a different way, or something like that, or the way person speaks, or anything like that. Perception is, there's going to be some determination, some judgments that are going to be made about things that are very culturally determined. And perception is consistent. Once you perceive something a certain way, it's very difficult for you to stop perceiving it that way. If you make a judgment and you say, okay, this is how it is, you generally have made up your mind and you're done. You moved on. So, which is why first impressions are very important. A lot of times what people will tell you, making a good first impression is a big deal. It's because perception is consistent. If you interpret me in a negative light, first time we met and you really didn't like me, then most likely the next time we meet, you're not going to like me either. And that's the problem. So, we are consistent in our perception. And another point that the authors make is that perception is completely inaccurate. And that means that because we pick and choose, because we don't perceive things objectively as they are, because our culture is driving us to understand something one way or another way, essentially, we are, not accurate. We're not being fair. We perceive things the way we perceive, and fairness is not what we're thinking about. We are trying simply to rationalize the world by applying our worldview to it, by applying our values, our cultural perspective to it. So how we think of things, how we categorize things, how we interpret things is driven by our culture. And when we recognize that, we realize that we are not always fair to people or things or whatever. Our culture should not be the measuring stick of something being good or bad or right or wrong. It's the measuring stick for us, but it's not the measuring stick for everyone else. So when we recognize that, it helps us to be more fair and to be more forgiving and to be kinder to people, because we realize our culture is not, the only right culture out there. There is no such thing as, right and wrong when it comes to culture. Our culture is our culture. It's unique to us. And just because something seems off to us, it doesn't mean something is really off. It just seems off or wrong to us because of where we come from. So, our perception is inaccurate. That when we recognize that, it frees us from, sort of say this position of being the judge on everyone. Okay, and so it's a good approach. All right, so that's a little bit of an excursus on a perception. I think it's a very helpful little aside that the textbook offers. Now, the next section of the textbook talks about beliefs, values, and behaviors. And I'm kind of hoping that most of you guys already have an understanding of what beliefs, values, and behaviors are and how they correspond. If not, we can have a little discussion about it. What are beliefs? Let's begin with that. What are beliefs? Beliefs, can be defined a number of ways. A belief is a concept or an idea that individual or a group holds to be true, or holds to be not true. Belief. You believe something is this, or you believe something is that. It's an idea. And it could be an idea or a concept that is individually embraced or embraced by the group. It depends very much on your orientation, whether your orientation is more collectivistic or individualistic, okay? And so if you believe that something is true, that to you, it becomes true. Or you believe something to be not true, then to you, it's not something, it's something that's untrue, and you don't always need proof. That's what beliefs are. Beliefs do not always require proof. This is your estimation. This is your understanding. Now, we've already talked about beliefs a little bit earlier in this course, and we talked about that there's different levels or degrees of belief. Some beliefs we are willing to change, modify, even let go sometimes. Other beliefs we're not willing to give up. We are very staunch about certain things we believe because they lay at the very foundation of everything in our life. So there are minor things sometimes that we're willing to be flexible with, and then there's major things that we're not willing to be flexible with. So one thing about beliefs, you can have your own individual beliefs, but usually shared beliefs are more powerful. Okay, when you share your belief with other people, you feel justified that that belief is right. Why? Well, because all these people can't be wrong. That's the idea. I believe in fact, a lot of people say, I believe what I believe because all these other people believe the same thing. We all can't be wrong. It's not possible. That's kind of a rationalization that people use. So shared beliefs are even stronger. And when we know that other people believe something as we do, that just gives us, more reason to continue to embrace this idea or a thought or concept. Okay. And that usually, translates into a much stronger belief and actually to an attitude. Attitude is a little bit different towards belief. Attitude is when you see something positively or negatively. Okay. But it's dependent on your belief. And so what's really kind of neat is that a lot of our beliefs are subject to continuous interpretation. So some people, they believe something and they don't want to examine their beliefs. They're not willing to even consider that their beliefs need to be re-examined or modified or changed or somehow altered. Other people are willing to continually re-examine their beliefs and rethink them and reinterpret them in new light. So essentially, belief is a concept or idea that you believe to be true or not true, but it's something that you say is or is not. Doesn't have to have proof. It's just how you see things. Okay, that's a belief. Now, values a little bit different. Values are much more foundational. Values is something that you consider to be desirable or undesirable. Okay, this is something, it could be that your society's way of telling you this is a good thing to do, or this is a good way to live, this is a good way to be. Values, most people hold values and they're not always conscious. Most of the time they're subconscious. So values are basically guidelines of how we act in society. It's the good way to act or the bad way to act, desirable way to act or undesirable way to act, right way to act, wrong way to act. So appropriate way to act or inappropriate way to act. Those are values. Our cultural values, our religious values, our family values, they're all, important aspects of our cultural, sort of say, makeup. We all have values, whether we recognize them or not. Like I said, many times they're subconscious. People who are religious most of the time recognize that they have values because it's a big part of their religious, sort of say, perspective on life. But even people who are not religious have values, just as many, and sometimes even more. It's just they don't always think about those things, and they don't always think where their values come from. For religious people, it's easy. They can say, my values come from my religion. They come from, the commandments I learned as a child, or things like that. So values are pretty broad and usually pretty stable. And so they have to do with what's right and what's wrong, what's appropriate, what's inappropriate. So those are, our values. And we'll examine some values, some cultural values in the textbook a little bit later. I mean, that's what, textbook starts looking at those values that we have as a people or as cultures, and understanding them, where they come from, basically. But most of the time that we have conflict, most of the time that we have misunderstanding between cultures, okay, intercultural conflict, intercultural understandings, most of the time are tied to values. Because if you think that something is right, or if you think that something is wrong, this is the right way to act, this is the wrong way to act, and you see another person acting in a way that is inconsistent with those values, that's when you get upset. That's when you start, coming undone. That's when you start getting angry because the person is not exhibiting the kind of behavior you think they should be. And that makes you upset. It makes you uncomfortable. It makes you, not want to have contact with that person, or in the least not understand why they're acting the way they're acting. So we feel uncomfortable, essentially. And that creates conflict. That's where we don't understand each other. It's usually confusion sets in, and that is where we, sort of say, our communication starts to break down. So if we understand each other's values and why we have those values, then, regardless of whichever culture we come from, then we minimize our intercultural conflict, and we actually enhance our intercultural communication, because we realize this is the area where we most likely to have problems, with each other. Something that the textbook says is really funny. If you consider the other person strange, they probably consider you strange as well. So if you think somebody's weird and they act in a very weird way, the truth is completely the other way for them. They think you are weird and acting completely weird, because what you consider as normal is normal to you. And to them, it's not. And that's why, we don't connect, essentially. That's why we think that this person is strange and unusual. Now, and then the next aspect that we need to look at is behaviors. Behavior is a little bit easier because behaviors come out of our values and beliefs. If we believe that something is true, okay, and we also have a value of this is how we should act out this truth or live out this truth, then that becomes our behavior. It flows straight out of it. Okay? So whatever we consider to be true, whatever we consider to be appropriate, is how we act it out. Okay? So different people, different behaviors, choices that people make in life, behaviors that they practice become, are really guided by the beliefs and values. So let's, I'm going to play around, just for fun. Sometimes I like to, pick on a cultural value and kind of take it apart. So, but I also realize that could be kind of disrespectful sometimes to people. So I'll pick a cultural value that I don't think you guys espouse particularly. I don't think anyone in class believes that. So I'll just pick something like that. Let's look at Hinduism. In a Hindu culture, life is considered to be sacred. Why? Because of reincarnation. Think about it. The belief in reincarnation is at the core of Hindu understanding of the world. They believe that your life doesn't end. You just go into a different type of being, okay? And you are reborn at endless times. So as a result, Hindus, by and large, are vegetarian. Why? Because they don't want to eat life. Why would they not want to eat life? Because those are the creatures into which they themselves or their relatives reincarnate. Think about it. I'm not trying to be disrespectful or simplistic to the culture, but I want you to understand that their behavior, their choice, their everyday choice of being vegetarian is reflected 100% on their value. And the value is that eating animals is wrong. And the reason why eating animals is wrong is they believe the value of not eating animals comes from a belief that reincarnation is really happening. It is true. It happens all the time. And so if you believe in reincarnation, therefore, your value would be not to eat living creatures. And therefore, you will be a vegetarian. It will affect your behavior, essentially. Other people who don't believe the same things, let's say people who live in India who are not Hindus, let's say Muslims living in India, do not possess a belief in reincarnation. And therefore, they don't feel like they have to be vegetarians. So, which in turn offends the Hindus. You see how now they have a cultural conflict. And they will never come to a common understanding because their worldviews are different. Because one believes in reincarnation and the other one doesn't. One is vegetarian because they can't be not vegetarian, and the other one is not a vegetarian because they don't have to, because they may choose to, maybe to have some sort of a better relationship or understanding with people, but they don't have to. They don't feel obligated to become vegetarians just because their worldview dictates it. It doesn't, and that's the difference. So, in a sense, Hindus must be vegetarians. In a sense, if you're going to believe in reincarnation, then you better be vegetarian. Basically, you see the idea. Otherwise, you're not consistent with your beliefs. Otherwise, I could say you don't really believe this to be true. You see the point? All right, so hopefully that makes sense. This is the relationship between behaviors and values and beliefs. Does that make sense? You guys want to jump in on it? Can you think of examples in your culture, perhaps, that where you believe something to be true and that translates to a value and that translates to a behavior? Think with me for a second. Just pick one, pick a belief and how it translates to a particular value and then how it translates to behavior. Anybody? I'd love to hear an example from your culture, because when you give me an example, it will really show to me that you understand the interrelation between these three things that we're talking about. I know I got you stumped because I got you on the spot. I'm asking you to give me an example, and all of your thinking like, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. I'll give you one from from my culture. So I'll start off. So, for example, in Jewish culture, there's a strong belief in there's a particular practice. I'm going to walk it backwards. There's a particular practice of people getting married and not really having sexual contact with each other prior to getting married. Now, where is that coming from? Why do people choose not to live together and, enjoy life, marital life together before they, actually formally get married? Because people have a value, and because people have a belief. Now, belief is very simple. Belief is that, that we have these gender roles and we're different, and that this is how God wants it. There's a commandment, that we're supposed to be faithful. We're supposed to be faithful to one person, kind of going back to the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, made for each other. And there's a certain holiness and sanctity to this marital union. It's not open to everybody. So one man, one woman, and so people take that belief and translate it into a value. And the value is abstaining from contact, sexual contact with multiple people or with people who are not married. Why? Because that creates promiscuity, which is actually forbidden, in the Jewish scripture. So you could see how a belief, for example, in the holiness of, let's say, sexual relationship between spouse, translates to a value of not violating that type of behavior, which then translates to first getting married and then becoming, sexually involved with each other. So that's just one example. And it's based on a religious belief. You're not going to, if a person follows a different religion, they're not going to have the same belief, is what I'm trying to say. Let's say a person who comes from a different culture, they don't have the same scriptures that Jews have, and they don't teach them about sanctity of, sexual relationship between husband and wife, and therefore they're not going to have the same value. So when I see people, living together and not married, and I don't judge them as being, oh, they're such terrible people, they're sinners, they're awful, God hates what they're doing, and things like that. That's my perspective. That's my cultural view. That's my religious, upbringing, right? I can't transfer that to somebody who's a Buddhist, let's say. Why? Because maybe in Buddhism, there's nothing like that. They don't have the same ideas that, where that comes from. Now, Christians and Jews happen to share these kinds of things, but other religions don't necessarily do. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. I don't know. Unless you get to know that religion really well and you understand their religious values, you don't take it as for granted that they have the same exact value that you do. So the value that people put on marriages and the value that people put on not living together before getting married and things like that really comes from, your beliefs, which are, usually supported by family and, instigated by religious institution. That's just how it is. And they're taught through the holy texts. And so you embrace those things. So anyway, that's my example. Does that make sense? Yeah. You have an example for me? Anybody has thoughts of something from their culture that's kind of like belief, value, behavior, kind of like that? Anybody? Everybody is waiting for somebody else to be first, I think. I really want you to have fun and practice with me this, because if you understand a relationship, I mean, it makes so much sense. It makes so much sense. I mean, I can walk you through all the time. Like, Christians do not, let's say evangelical Christians, Bible believing Christians who believe that the Bible is really says what it says and it is what it is. It's literal. Okay. Do not embrace abortion. Why? Why don't they embrace abortion? Because of the value that life comes from God, beliefs and values that tell you life comes from God, God creates it. we don't have the right to end it because we didn't start it. We can't end it. We are not the masters. And because Christians believe that a person becomes a human before they're born, they're a human being, they're real, they are completely who they are inside the mother's womb. I mean, that's what theology teaches you. Then if a person's life is terminated while they're in the womb, is no different than the person's life is terminated when they're out. So it would be like me murdering a person, right? So a person, if I just walk up to a person on the street and take a knife to their throat and kill them, I'll go to jail, right? But if I do that to somebody who is not born yet, I don't. What's the difference? Christians say there is no difference. Why? Because to them, the person is a person before they come out of the womb. Other cultures don't share that same belief. They don't share that same idea. They don't believe that a person is a person before they come out of the womb, only after. And based on that, they will say, no, abortion is perfectly fine. So here's a conflict. It's a value conflict. Do you see that where people find disagreement is on the value part? If I believe that life begins in the womb and that life is just as much in the womb that is outside the womb, then all of a sudden my value would not allow me to kill a child inside the womb, because I would be guilty of murder. And everyone knows in the Bible it says, do not murder. It's one of the big 10, right? So you could see how that flows. But other people do not embrace the same belief. And because of that, they don't see that as murder. And therefore, they don't have a problem doing it. So there you go. These are beliefs, values, behaviors. That's how we are. Everything we do in life is like that. Boom, boom, boom. And some of these, I'm playing on religious beliefs because religious beliefs are the easiest, okay? But it doesn't have to be religious. It could be a cultural belief. It could be a belief in something that comes from your culture that's not connected to religion. It could be a family belief or a history belief or something like that. That, it's like, I believe this, therefore this is my value, and therefore that's how I behave. So it doesn't always have to be driven by, religion. I'm just using religion as an example right now.
Hey, Peter.
All right. Anybody came up with a good example for me?
And I was thinking about, and you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
And I don't know this same thing happening in other countries, but in Brazil, we have the fight. I think so. The fight, or a lot of difference between the old generation and new generation.
Okay.
Yeah, our values, our beliefs, our behaviors is completely different between the other people. And
Okay.
the new generation, I think so, have been influenced by the globalization, the
Mm-hmm.
cultures, and I think so. We don't have it more identified for us. We have been influenced by the other cultures, and
Right.
generation is completely different the old generations. You understand?
Right. No, I understand. And Brazil is a very diverse society, so you already have so many people who are so different to begin with. So it's very easy to be influenced away. So you have like an example for me, Fabio, that's like a one thing that people fight over or disagree on. One thing. Like, what? Give me one example that old generation and new generation fight over. Like, what do the people from old generation hate that the young people do? Let's put it that way.
Oh wow!
Just one thing. I'm
And
sure there's many, but one.
maybe, wow. Let me think.
Okay.
The
That's what I'm looking for.
traditional family.
Okay,
Maybe
family. So by traditional family, you mean
yeah, respect others and believers and more. I don't know.
Okay.
I think the difference in the conflict in the traditional families in the new families, you can see the difference inside the church.
Okay.
Um,
Maybe.
Sometimes doesn't like don't like worship more with drums and guitars
Okay.
and and new families love it.
Okay. So
Uh,
let's pick on that one. I like it. So you gave me something concrete to hold on to.
yeah,
Worship. People
yeah,
disagree on how to worship right, even
yeah.
in the same church. You
In
have
the same
older
church.
generation that likes worshiping one way, younger generation that likes worshiping another way.
Hmm.
So what they disagree is on value. And the value is this is the right way to worship. One says it's one way, another one says it's another way. They both believe in worship, but neither one of them agree that the other person wants to do it is the right way. Okay. So that's the breakdown. And therefore the behavior. What older generation does not like is how they don't disagree that you should use music, right? They both say music is okay. They don't disagree that you shouldn't use different instruments, for example, right? Instruments are okay, singing is okay, music is okay, but what kind of instruments? What kind of music? The style of music. That's where people fall apart. So, what people consider holy and appropriate is different than what people consider holy and appropriate. And that comes down to an idea of preference now. Because here's how you settle this disagreement, and you won't be able to settle it all the way, but you can settle it. You basically ask a person to say, prove to me that this particular style of music or this particular way of worship is from God, and use as many proofs as you want to. I don't care. Give me 45 reasons why, and I'm going to do the same, or I'm going to go through every one of those reasons and tell you why it's not. And that's where a person realizes that their belief is more of a preference. Their belief is more of how they like things, and it's not really based on something concrete. And so that this is where the difference is. Young generation, old generation, it's a matter of preference. uh Wearing pants, do they have to be baggy pants or do they have to be skinny pants? What's better? Well, who decides what's better? Unless the Bible tells you specifically, don't do this, you just supposed to wear pants. You're just supposed to cover up. Maybe you're just supposed to wear a skirt or just pull a bag on yourself and just hop around in a big sack, because it just says to cover up, right? Whether your pants are skinny or not skinny, that becomes the issue of what a culture considers modesty or immodesty, or appropriate or inappropriate. And this is where the values is where we have the battle, essentially. And it doesn't matter if it's generation. You guys are picking on a part of culture fighting within itself, and that happens too. But it's much more so of cultures fighting other cultures on these things. So that's kind of what I wanted to see. I wanted to see intercultural conflict, where conflict that, people say, those Scottish people wearing skirts. What kind of nonsense is that? Right?
Yeah,
Just think about it.
yeah. There are a curiosity in Brazil. I think it's not for believers or beliefs. It's a kind of superstition. Maybe the origin is because the Catholicism in Brazil is very open,
Mm-hmm.
and we have courtesies and all kind of African religions inside the Catholicism. And then the death is not the end. It's a kind of thing thought about the reincarnation or the ghosts or whatever.
Hmm?
And then the cemetery is a place you have to avoid. Oh, it's scary
Cemetery is a
place.
place you need
Yeah,
to avoid. Okay,
yeah.
good.
When you came here, and we see a lot of graves, like in my neighborhood
Right.
or in
How
church.
about this? In the backyard of your church.
Yeah. This is very strange for us.
Very strange to you. So
Yeah.
in your culture, cemeteries is a places to avoid.
Yes.
So when you see an American church that has a cemetery attached to it, you're like, why would you do this? To your mind, this is something that bothers you because your value is different. Because your value is
Yeah.
you stay away from the dead. The dead are the dead, the living are living, and you don't mix.
Yeah. I
You
think
don't mix.
this is
Something
change our
unclean maybe about
behavior.
cemeteries.
Yeah.
Maybe cemeteries are unclean. Maybe they're bad places. Maybe there's ghosts and spirits, in the cemeteries. Whatever you believe about afterlife and the spiritual world, sometimes people feel that the afterlife and that spiritual world bleeds over into your life, and so you want to stay away from it because you don't want that influence, right? So ghosts and all this other stuff, yeah, I get it. I totally understand it. It also drives me crazy. You know what I'll give you an example, Mateus, what drove me crazy. You're familiar with the story of American Revolution and Paul Revere. And so I was in Boston, and I walked into a church that was the original church, like of the Pilgrims, and this is where like the Paul Revere attended or something like that. And so in the church, they had tombs inside the church, just like the Catholics, by the way. Catholics do tombs inside the church. Now, to me, I was going absolutely crazy because in Jewish culture, you do not have cemeteries anywhere near. Cemeteries are considered unclean. They defile. They represent death. They represent sin. And the one thing you separate yourself from in all your life is death and sin. You don't allow it to encroach on your life. And so they're considered defiling. If you go to a cemetery in Jewish culture to visit a grave of somebody, you wash your hands. How does that help? But it's like as if you went to the bathroom. You treat it as if you got dirty and you wash your hands because it's an unclean place. And so there's this understanding of death and sin. The reason why people die, essentially, is because of sin. And so you just push that away. And to bring that into a church and to be reminded of that is like, I don't understand. So if you read the Hebrew Bible, you understand the Old Testament, there's a lot of separation. Dead things will not touch the living things. They're two different realms. And so sin and cannot come in contact with life. Otherwise, you become defiled. And so for me to see something like that was absolutely freaking me out. I was like, why would somebody want to sit on the grave of their great-great-great-grandfather and sing some songs in church, or something, worshiping God, singing on the grave? I'm like, oh, that'd be so disrespectful besides that. And I'm completely surrounded by death all the time. That's depressing. And so in some cultures, it's common for people to go to the grave and actually have like a picnic, have a lunch. I've seen this like in Russian culture that I've observed, because I was born in Russia. I've seen people all the time go to the cemetery. They have a little bench right next to the grave. They sit out, they take a picnic, they pour themselves a drink. In fact, they pour a little cup for the deceased and they put it right next to their grave, as if they're going to come out at night and have a little shot and go back. But that's what they do. They actually want to have this relationship, this communion, this meal. They want to share it. They are not having a picnic in a cemetery because they don't have a better place. They're trying to connect to that person who is gone. They're trying to have an ongoing relationship with the dead, essentially, which again freaks me out, but that's my other side. My other culture tells me this is not right. Where this culture, I see it practicing it, and it's like, I cannot do this. This is wrong. This is inconsistent with what I believe, how the world works, essentially. So yeah, we have these conflicts, all the time. But it all goes back to the idea: what is your belief? And then from your belief flows a value. This is what you do or do not do because of the way you believe. And then when that, and that pushes you to behave a certain way. Good. I'm glad we played around a little bit. You guys gave me something to work with. Okay. Appreciate that. All right, let's move on. There's the next section talks about understanding cultural patterns, and it's a bit self-explanatory. So I'm just going to say, I'm going to hit the main points. The points that the authors make is that you are more than your culture. There are patterns to our culture. We can all say, Brazilians are like this, but that doesn't mean every Brazilian is like that. Or you could say Koreans are like that, but that doesn't mean that every Korean is going to be like that. There's going to be differences. You are much more than your culture. And sometimes you are part of more than one culture. And that essentially, makes you different. So you could say Russians are like this, but just because I was born and raised in Russia doesn't mean I'm going to sit on a grave of my grandfather and have a meal with him. That's just not going to happen. Why? Because the other culture that I have is going to drive me away from that. So you can't make these general statements about people. But the cultural patterns are integrated, and we do have them, and they're real. And the cultures are dynamic. They're changing all the time. They don't stand still. They actually, change. It's what Fabio talked about. The old generation, the new generation are always at conflict. Why? Because culture doesn't stand still. We develop. And the problem is that the old generation developed a culture and they don't want to give it up. And the new generation is developing a culture and they don't want to give it up. Cultures develop. They don't stand still. They change. And unfortunately, many traditional cultures are resistant to change. So, and the cultural patterns also can be contradictory. Within the same culture, you will find patterns where one says one way and the other says another way. And you could say, wait a minute, your cultural value says this, but you don't do this. Why? And the truth is that we're not always consistent. We may believe in something, but it doesn't mean we always act that way. That we can fail in our behavior. Let's put it that way. We may believe something to be true, and we may hold a particular value, but we may not be very good about living out that value. Okay, so maybe we're a little bit idealistic if you want to think about it. So sometimes it doesn't translate into behavior is what I'm trying to say. Okay, so there are a number of cultural patterns that are presented in this chapter. In fact, the rest of this chapter is very highly driven by these cultural patterns. And I wanted to hit some of them with you guys. Let's see. But don't let's say, as you read this chapter, don't overvalue the cultural patterns. Look, understand, pattern is just that. It's a way to understand. But there's going to be differences. Pattern it applies in general way. Like I said, you can't say all Koreans are like this. You could say that majority of Koreans or the Korean predominant culture is to follow this pattern. And that doesn't mean that every single person is going to fit into that. So patterns, use them appropriately is what I'm trying to say. Is don't be rigid about applying a pattern to a culture. Use the pattern to help you see the big picture. to give you an understanding of a prediction of some sort. But don't be dogmatic about it. And so this particular chapter presents a number of cultural patterns that were developed by essentially, or not, they were not developed, they were discovered or described, articulated, let's put it that way, by anthropologists. Anthropology is an area of science that studies humans and human behavior, in general, and human culture. And so these anthropologists that, talk about values and how these patterns form. So the first one that we come in the textbook is Cole's. Cole's values Americans live by. So I'm going to talk about American values. The reason why this textbook begins with American values is because, well, it's written for an American market. And as I told you, you have to understand yourself before you can understand others, which is the reason why I'm asking you to reflect on yourself first. It's really important to me. If you understand your own culture and you can articulate why you do what you do, or you can explain, what are some of the strong features of your culture that set it apart from others, then you can appreciate other people's cultures. But it all begins with you as a point of reference. So, Americans is the first case that this textbook dives into. Okay, and so there's certain tendencies that all Americans have, but as we said, not all Americans are going to embrace every one of these, and not in the same way. They may embrace them only to a degree. But here are the predominant American values. The first one is personal control over nature. All right. So those of you, who have been around Americans for a while, even if you're not an American, would agree that Americans approach the environment and nature as something that can be conquered and tamed and harnessed and changed and reshaped for their personal and societal benefit. Right? You agree with that? You think that's true? Americans have control and mastery over nature. Their orientation towards the nature that they live around is that they are in charge, and they feel the freedom to change it and reshape it the way they want it. And you got to realize that that is not something that every culture out there embraces. This is something embraced by Americans, but it's not necessarily embraced by other cultures. So just out of curiosity, how many of you share that same perspective? How many of you do not share the same perspective? Like somebody, do you come from a culture that says, no, you cannot manipulate environment to that same degree as culture, as American culture says? Tell me, share with me. What is your culture's attitude towards nature? Because there's three options, essentially three options: control, subdue it, or live in harmony with it, kind of work with what you've got, or you're not supposed to mess with it at all. Don't touch it, just kind of let it be. Become a part of nature. You are a part of nature, essentially. I don't know what your perspective is, but I'm just curious. Can you even identify it?
I think my father's generations think the nature is very how to say, it is very good thing. So we don't have to touch the nature. So we have to preserve the nature. My father's generation thinks about that. Think like that. But new generation nowadays, many people, we think nature is just things we can use for our benefit.
Mm-hmm.
So I think
so you're being Americanized.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
You are being Americanized. That's okay to recognize that. But it's also okay to recognize what is the historical value of your culture. Historically, Asian cultures believe in living in harmony with nature. They don't believe about not messing with nature at all. Changing nature is okay, but minimal change, not invasive change. So the question is, how invasively does your culture believe that they can change nature? That's the question. Americans believe they can be very invasive, because they believe that we're in control, we're in charge. And the way we show that we're in charge is by exercising our authority in every way, shape possible. And this could be seen in agriculture, it could be seen in construction, it could be seen in anything. How Americans make roads. You could see that. Make a straight road. The topography may be very different. They're going to cut through and make a straight road. Why? Because driving on a straight road is more comfortable. I don't care that it's like this. We're going to straighten it out. You see them build highways. You see what people do. I don't know if you've driven through, tunnels. I've driven through tunnels that are so long in this country, where they take the mountain and they bore a huge hole straight through the core of the mountain. Now, in another culture, they would go around the mountain. But in America, they go through it. Why? Because they can. Because I like to go the shortest distance. And if it's hard, it's okay. I'm going to make a hole and I'm going to go through it. You see, that's the difference between mastery over nature and going around the mountain. There's a mountain. All right, I'll build the road. Yeah, it'll take me several more hours to get there. But I'm not going to mess with the nature. I'm going to go around it. Rerouting rivers, making dams, something Americans do all the time. Other countries may not do that at all, because they don't believe that they should mess with the environment to that degree. All right, another American cultural values change. Americans are receptive to change. They are future-oriented, and they believe that what's coming is better than what we have now. Other cultures may look at themselves completely different. They don't like change, and they may say what we've had before was better than what we have now. Where do you find yourself? Where do you think your culture fits in on this category? Do they love change? Do they embrace change? Change, progress? Or do they say, no, we want to keep things the way they've always been? What do you think? Where do you think your culture is on this point? Anybody?
Korean culture like to change their lives.
Koreans like to change.
Yeah, because I think the World War II and Korean War, we affected. We have to change it forcibly.
Okay.
So when Korean experiences war, they have to change it themselves very quickly.
Right.
To adjust themselves to another environment.
Okay.
That's the reason why nowadays many Koreans scientists and developers, they change new technology very fast than any other countries do.
And generally, people believe that change is good versus change is bad, right? Is what you're saying. So most Koreans think today that change is good, because it historically allowed Korea to better itself, right?
Yeah, many people think they want to something very quickly.
Okay.
The quick way is very good and better
Quick
for
way is good. I like that. That's progress. That's change. That's the same value as Americans have. So okay, so there's correlation there. That's good. Because some people do not like change. They're like, we need to keep things the way they always have been. Some people say what we've had 500 years ago was so much better than what we have now. We as a people have gone in a direction we should not have gone. We need to go back. Some people say we need to go back to the way things used to be. They don't mean that they want to, give up toilet paper or something like that. They just, there are other things. It's just general changes they do not like. All right. Time and control over time. American value is that time is valuable. Time is a commodity. Time can be measured, and it's measured in usually days, hours, sometimes seconds, sometimes minutes. Americans are crazy about time. They're very precise with time. So American value is that time is limited. You can run out of time. How does your culture feel about time? Being on time? Do you run out of time? Is time valuable? Is being on time a huge, important, thing or not? How do you feel about that? What do you think? Is it more important for you to be productive or to hang out with your buddy? I just want to know. Like, so here you are. Imagine you're working. You're sitting at your desk in your office. You're working. You have a load of work to do. I mean, your boss gave you all these tasks and you have to do this. And in a week, you have to submit this report and that report and this report. And you're really busy, right? And then your coworker from the next office come over and say, hey, let's go out to lunch. I'm really hungry. Let's go grab some Chinese. Let's enjoy, I found this great restaurant right around the corner that's really tasty. It's amazing. Let's go. What do? You say, no, I brought my sandwich. I'm going to eat right here at my desk. Or do you say, oh, forget it. I'm going to go out and spend a whole hour hanging out with my friend because that's more important than getting this work done? What do you do? Like, do you value time and tasks, or do you value relationships? This is a big difference between cultures.
In my case, I prefer spending time with the tasks and work first.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a very American value. Tasks and work first. You play later when you get done. Fun later.
Yeah, we try to mix with a good choice in the midway.
In the midway, okay.
Yeah.
You're going to find some balance.
But you have tasks. You have you have to do anything, and then you need to down it first.
Yeah.
Before the enjoy the weather.
Right. Okay, that's good. That's good to know that about yourself, because some people do not feel that way at all. They would say, their boss would say, how come you didn't do this? Well, John came over and we went out for lunch and we were only going to be gone for 45 minutes, but he was having trouble at home and he was telling me about all the issues he's fighting with his wife, and it turned out into an hour and a half. So yeah, I had a very long lunch and it didn't work out. Sorry, my job is not done. Sorry, I didn't finish my task. And the boss would say, oh, I see. That's very important. If he's from the same culture. See, he's going to say, oh, yeah. Why? Because people are more important, right? Lives, tasks, tasks are not as important. People are more important. So again, person from the same culture would say, oh, yeah, I understand. And they will actually accept that excuse. A person from a different culture is going to say, no, that's not how it works. You stay late and you get it done. You don't go home until it's finished. And they're going to say, but I have wife, I have children. And I say, no, it doesn't matter. You should have thought about that earlier. See, that's the difference in culture. And it translates to a workplace. And somebody's going to say, oh, I can't work like this. This is hostile. This is terrible. I hate my job. I hate my life. Things like that. It's just it's a cultural conflict. It's how you see the time and responsibility. Is time important to you? Is commitments to your time, are more important than commitments to people and things like that. Okay, equality, egalitarianism is another really strong American value. In America, people believe that everyone is equal. You're a human being. I'm a human being. You're just as important as I am. Okay, and so America is a non-hierarchical society, and people are valued for being people. Let's say if I'm a president of a company, am I more valuable as a person versus, a guy who mops the floors? In some societies, yeah, because I'm the president, I'm better in every way. I'm more valuable. And that other guy, not valuable. Okay? But in America, there's this idea of equality. Now, while we're not equal in job, we're not equal in status, we're not equal in wealth, we're not equal in our brain capacity, we're not equal in our education. We could be completely unequal in many areas. I am more talented and he's less talented, which is why I'm running a company and he's mopping floors. The idea is that as a human beings, we're equal, and we deserve to be treated the same, essentially. If we come to a bank, I'm the president. I don't get to cut in line in front of you and say, excuse me, I'm more important. I want to cash my check right now, and I'm first. Why? Because I'm the president. And you guys move over, take your mop and move over, or something like that. See, that doesn't work in America. No, I get behind him in line and I wait to be serviced. If I come to a restaurant, the same thing, right? There's a wait. Oh, excuse me, I'm the president. No, there people were here before you. If you wanted to be seated earlier, you should have made reservations. Whatever. The point is, I am not, just because, I'm deemed more important, I'm not going to be treated that way. So Americans are like that. They have this idea of egalitarianism, equality. That doesn't mean it works like that every single time and it works perfectly. There are always times when it doesn't work. Yes, people get treated unfairly all the time. But by and large, Americans believe in equality. And they practice it, and you could see it in their everyday lives. So kind of like that. So, and we accept that we understand just how things are, just because I'm the big guy, I don't get to cut in line in front of other people, sort of say. All right. So another one is individuality and privacy. Americans are really huge on that. They believe that I can do what I want to do, and this is my personal private business, and you can't tell me what to do. It's not your place. Individuality and privacy. Each person is unique. Each person is different. Each person has their own unique way of doing things the way they want to do it, and you can't tell them that they're being wrong about it, because they are an individual. Every individual and their own uniqueness is valued. So individualism is a big deal in America. Personhood is a big deal. And so people have these values of being independent, being equal, being self-reliant. It all is connected, actually. All of that is connected. Some people in America, if they do not express their individuality well enough, they're actually looked upon as strange and weird, and kind of backwards and maybe not as well developed of human beings, because they cannot express their individuality, things like that. So individuality is highly valued in America, which is why people always ask, what do you want? How do you want it? Things like that. You're not just being offered what it is. You have options. You always have options. So, and because of that, personal worth is valued by achievement. And so that's kind of all connected. So people choose to participate in various things in America, and they have lots of choice because of individualism, versus other countries where you don't really have choice. This is just how things are, and you take it or leave it. In America, they won't accept it. They have to create choices, because the way I like it is different from the way you like it. And so individualism is a huge deal for American culture. The other one is self-help. Self-help is connected to individualism, by the way. personal achievement, personal growth, your own independence, your own individuality, being self-reliant is a big aspect of American culture. Why? Because historically speaking, where people came from, to this country, they had nothing, and they relied on themselves to get themselves where they are. They didn't come here, and it's not like they had a community ready to support them. They didn't have family members. They were the first to come here. Just think of American pioneers moving from England or Spain or Germany or something like that. And they come in, and here's this land, and it's not like they have a family out there. Oh, excuse me, I would like to borrow a hammer. No, you make your own hammer, you bring your own hammer, and if you didn't bring your own hammer, too bad. Nobody's out here to give you a hammer. You don't have a support system. You're on your own. Make your own hammer or figure out how to do it without a hammer. So, and that gave the value of Americans of this, I'm going to help myself. I'm going to figure things out on my own. I'm going to do everything by myself. And I can make it without other people, basically. Where in other countries, it's inconceivable that you would make anything without any other people helping you out. It's just not even possible. But Americans believe that. You can walk into a bookstore and you can find one of the biggest sections in American bookstores will be called self-help. You ever seen that? Walk into Barnes & Noble and you will see self-help, a huge section. In other countries, it wouldn't even exist. But in America, it's one of the biggest selling categories for books. It's where you can pick a book and learn how to be better this and better that. And, you learn how to achieve success in this area of your life and then learn how to achieve that success in that area of your life, because it's the American way. You do it by yourself. You are the one in charge, and you can make changes in your life. Where in other countries, that's not something that people embrace to such degree as Americans do. All right. Another is competition and free enterprise. That's a huge American value. Americans believe in competition. Competition for them begins very early on in their life. People are action-oriented, and people are always compared to each other very early on in America, and your achievements are recognized, they're celebrated, they're coveted. Other people look at your achievements and they compare themselves to you, and they say, I need to do better. Why? Because that person has definitely achieved more than I've achieved. So the whole idea of competitive nature is a really huge aspect of American society. It's part of the reason why there's such an economic prosperity, is because people compete with each other. But that competitiveness and competition is a really big aspect of American culture. Now, in some cultures, people don't do that. In some cultures, personal success is not measured by what they've achieved. In some cultures, personal success is measured by which family they belong to. How about that? Think about it. In some cultures, how important you are, how successful you are, is basically which family do you belong to. If you belong to this family, you are this important, this successful. You belong to that family, you're this important, that successful. In America, it's not like that. Your family only gets you so far. The rest is up to you. The rest is up to you. So it's, in some cultures, it's just, that's not what gets you to the top. Okay. And it's not how the top is perceived. But in America, it's certainly like that. It's all about self-achievement and competition. So there are many cultures out there that promote cooperation and interdependency. America promotes competitiveness. It's me against you, and who's going to win? Okay, that's the idea. Not all cultures are like that, by far. Future orientation, I think, is something really worth talking about. Americans are very futuristically oriented. They think that what's coming forward is going to be better than what we have now. And in fact, I see this even in a lot of religious, perspective. I think because of the influence of Christianity, many Americans look to the future much more than to the past and to the present. They always think about, when I get to heaven, this is going to be fine. That's going to be nice. Everything's going to be wonderful. What's going on with my life right now is not as important as what's going to happen in the future. So it's all about future. And if you think about it, a lot of the songs, a lot of religious songs and worship, they're all about the future. They're all about not right now. They're all about what's going to happen sometime. Someday when I see God face to face, someday when I see Jesus, or this and this and that. Which to me is always weird because, I personally come from a culture of more of now, rather than future. So, but Americans, I find them to be very optimistic, very forward-looking, and always focusing on things may not be great right now, but in the future, they're going to be better. And that pushes people to progress. That pushes people to achievement. You get the idea. It's actually all interconnected. But that's what makes Americans who they are. They're innovators. They don't stand still. They come up with new ways to do the same old task. They invent new things all the time. Americans do. Make things up. Some cultures don't do that. Some cultures don't invent things at all. They just stay where they are. Or they borrow. If they have anything new, they borrow from some other culture. So I don't know where you come from. You tell me. What do you judge your own culture as being future oriented or not? What do you think? Future oriented or not? How do you see the future? How does your culture look at it? Is it something that you in control of even? Go ahead, Edison.
Yeah, I think Brazil thinks forward in future, and yeah, Brazil has a.
So very, very, very much the same like Americans.
Yeah.
Looking to the future, things are going to be better. Optimistic. How about Edison? Let me ask you a question. How about how is youth seen in Brazil? Are young people looked upon as is there a lot of hope and trust placed in young people in Brazil, or is there a lot of hope and trust placed in older generations in Brazil because they're wiser, they know what they're doing, or is it the young people because they have the energy and they can pretty much do anything they want because they're young and they're strong?
Yeah, I think the young people in Brazil are Brazil now. The I don't know how to explain that, because the corruption is highly
corruption. Okay.
Yeah, it's deeply inside the community.
Okay.
The young people is not afraid about the future. They don't think about my future. They think about the present.
Okay.
Because it's hard to say that, because the corruption is not I can't say what gonna happen in the future in Brazil, because the culture is so, how the word for say is it's hard to say for me. What I'm gonna say is that the young people is not afraid about future. They think in present. Is this what I'm gonna say?
So they're more flexible. So
yeah.
Corruption. You bring up corruption. Is corruption mainly due because of the older generation, not the younger generation? Who's participating in the corruption more? Who's
younger and older?
It's the older generation.
Yeah.
See, that's why.
Yeah.
They're the problem. That's how people see it. Okay, good. Thank you for answering my question. That makes total sense. Okay, good. That's good. Fantastic. So, all right. Anybody else? Future oriented or not future oriented? How is flexible or inflexible? Americans are very flexible. They absolutely have no fear of the future because they feel they're in control of the future. They're the driving force. Your future is what you make it. That's what they will say in America. The future is in your hands. Your future is what you make it. Now, there are cultures that don't believe that, and many cultures that don't believe that. They say our future is predetermined. Our future is what God says it will be, or our future is what our parents decided long time ago will be, or the future is not in our hands because we can't change it because our culture is so corrupt. It will always be that way.
Yes.
The rich will always be in control. The poor will always be subjugated. We will never have fairness. We will never have justice. We will always be the way we've always been. And then we've been this way for 500 years and we'll be that way for 500 years again. What do you think, Matthias?
Yeah, this is the truth. The future in Brazil is not in your hands, it's a government hands.
It's in government.
And if you have open a new business, you take in your mind the most of this go to government, and the government have agencies that they can close your business because I have a lot of rules about everything.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't to keep all the rules.
Sure, and we have so many rules.
Follow all the rules.
If you're successful, I will make sure and find some rules that you're breaking to make sure to give you some fines, so that your success can be leveled out a little bit, so that I can benefit from your success because I'm sure you're breaking some rules, and now you have to pay me off to make me go away, so you can keep making a success in your company. Because now I'm a problem. I understand how that works. I understand. And I know it's frustrating. It's very frustrating for people to live that way. So I get it. Which is why a lot of people come to America. Because that there is corruption everywhere, including in America, but not to that degree, not to that level. And success is not hampered, it is encouraged, and people admire success, and so it's a little bit different. People don't try, if they see you succeed, they don't try to kick you as hard as they can so you fail.
I have a friend and he told me freedom is better than money.
Freedom is better than money. Yeah, it's true, because psychologically, think about it,
in freedom we can find it here.
Yeah. Good point. Excellent. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Appreciate that. Another American value is action, work orientation. We already talked about it. A lot of times in America, when you meet people, they're going to ask you, what do you do? That's the first question they ask you. Why? Because they actually believe that your job defines you. What do you do? I used to tell people I'm a philosopher. That freaks them out. I'm like, what do philosophers do? We think. And they're like, well, how do you make money? So I would freak people out, just because I know they ask me this question, and it's a silly question, because what they're trying to figure out is, what are you? Who are you? What defines you? What they really want to know is what are you all about? But they ask you, what do you do? So if you come from a society where your job really has nothing to do with who you are, you could be a philosopher working as a janitor, right? Why not? Gives you lots of time to think. So, just as you're vacuuming those floors, you're thinking about big questions in life. How did life begin, and how do we fit into this world? Things like that. So you don't know. But in America, it's an action-oriented society. What you do defines you. If you say, I'm a teacher, okay, now I know what you are. If you say, I'm a lawyer, okay, now I know what you do. You're all about rules, and you're all about court systems and judges and fighting for justice, whatever it may be. It's just people clearly, if you tell them who you are, I'm a computer programmer. All right, he's a geek. Got it. Understand. He's into computers. And because people connect your personality to your job. And that's just the assumption, because it's a doing culture. Americans don't ever sit still. They always do something. And, I'm talking about predominantly, obviously there's people who sit still and do nothing, but Americans as a people in generally are action-oriented people. And so they value hard work. People spend a lot of time working. Work is a big deal. Your job is a big deal. You spend most of your time working than not working. Think about it. So it's a big part of American identity. Whatever you do is how people see you. So in America, people believe in the dignity of human labor. They believe that working is good. Sitting still is considered bad. Having any job is better than sitting still and waiting for the perfect job. That's what Americans believe. That's a core value. Labor is good. I don't care what labor. Whether you're trying to start your own business or you're, cleaning houses or something like that for somebody else, it doesn't really matter. The fact that you have a job, you're already seen as a better person who is just sitting there and waiting and collecting unemployment and saying, one day I'll get a job. One day I'll find something to do. Americans would say, go. The Wendy's, McDonald's over there is hiring. Go make burgers or something, Oh, no. I want an office job. Just go make burgers and keep looking for the office job. That's what Americans would tell you, because sitting still and waiting for that perfect job is considered to be not good, versus doing something is better, than just sitting still. So Americans are very, very action oriented. They love work. They believe work is good. Person is engaged in work activity as a good, active, good member of society. Let's put it that way. What their job is secondary. It's the fact that they're working is important. So informality, you probably noticed this, that Americans are very down to earth, very informal. Because of the belief in equality, everyone kind of gets treated more or less the same. They're not huge in titles, not huge into, big important introductions and things like that. People are very casual. They dress casually. You wouldn't think of a person who is one of the richest people in the world in America comes out to address his employees in blue jeans and a t-shirt. Okay? I mean, I want you to imagine let's say, a president of Sony Corporation coming out to address his employees in blue jeans and t-shirt. It's not going to happen. Samsung, how about that? Whoever's in charge of Samsung, can you imagine that person coming out to address all the employees dressed in blue jeans and a t-shirt? It's not going to happen. He's going to come out in the suit and tie, right? Because to show that formality. I'm the boss. You're not. Okay. Why? Because Korean system is more hierarchical. In America, the guy who owns Amazon, who is like one of the richest people in the world, comes on TV or comes in front of his employees and he's wearing t-shirt and jeans. And he's walking around and talking with people and shaking hands and doing high fives. That would never happen with Samsung, right? And the president of Samsung is not going to walk around the factory giving people high fives. It's not going to happen. No. You come in, bow, show respect, address them in the proper way. Mr. So-and-so, President so-and-so, recognize them who they are. In fact, in some societies, a person like that would never walk into a factory floor. Never. They would never see him ever. They only see a picture. That's it. Will never happen. And this guy walks out and, these people, work for me. They're packaging up the latest iPad that somebody just bought. And so he's going to walk the floor and tell people, hey, I appreciate your work. Thank you. Shake their hand. Will never happen. So Americans are like that. They're informal. And you see that in dress. You see that in how they carry themselves. The most important, rich people like that will step down to feel closer so that people can see them as a human being rather than some big boss out there who doesn't care about the world. So it's that informality. And it's affirmed by the idea of equality. Okay, equality, we're all the same. This guy is just as important as this guy. Yes, they're not equal. Yeah, this guy's a billionaire and the other guy is just making packages, but they're both of them are human beings and they deserve dignity. And so doesn't mean they can't shake hands and have a relationship. So that's the idea. Directness, openness, and honesty is another feature of American culture. You probably, have encountered that, where Americans speak their mind. They tell you exactly what they think, right? Straight to your face. Okay. Some of you are smiling. So Hirong is smiling. She's like, oh, I know what Americans are. They tell you exactly what they think. Like, that would never happen in Korea. People do not dare tell you what they think. It's impolite. It's improper, which is okay. But Americans value that. They believe in direct honesty, and just straightforward talk. Very forthright. Sometimes that's considered to be rude, disrespectful, obnoxious, but that's American value. That is connected to a number of things. Number thing is the value of time. If time is valuable, then me spending 15 minutes trying to explain something to you in a very indirect way is a waste of time. Where what I really want you to do is I want you to do this, A, B, C, D, done. But I'm going to beat around the bush and say, maybe someday when you have a chance, would you do me a favor? Would you do this? And if you happen to do this, would you also do that? Maybe, if you're in the right mood, and that would be a very polite way, a roundabout way of asking you to do something for me. Where, a very American straightforward way is I need you to do this, this, and this, and this, and I need you to do it by this time. Okay? And you're supposed to say, yes, sir, and do it. So that's American versus, other cultures that will be more indirect. They would just try to find other ways to motivate you to do the same thing. Practicality and efficiency is very important. Again, tied to time value. Americans have no problem about being practical. Think about it. Americans shop yard sales all the time, garage sales, right? And they're not embarrassed about it. They will find some used item somewhere and they will tell you, you won't believe I got such a good price on this and this and this because I bought this at the yard sale. In other cultures, they're like, I can't tell you that because they don't value that same idea. They would not tell you what they paid for something. In fact, they will make you think that they paid way more for something, where Americans have no problem with bragging that they got a good deal. I got this half off, or something like that. And what the reason why Americans do that is because they are frugal and they value that and they're practical. Why do I need to spend more money than, I have? Where other cultures that are built on prestige, that jacket is only worth, $100, but I paid $500 for it. Well, Americans would say, well, you're a fool. It's only worth $100. You should have paid $75. No, I paid $500 for it. Why? Because it's prestige, because I have all this money and I don't need to worry about it. So it's showing things off, kind of say. So Americans are very practical. They value practicality, very efficiency, getting things done on time. So that's a big part of American identity. Materialism, another feature here. I don't know. I think that's true of a lot of people, but Americans are definitely materialistic. Part Part of it is because it's a culture that has so much, but people do like their stuff. They look like things. They buy new things all the time. And people do get measured by the things that they have. So it's a very interesting part of American culture. But Americans tend to see material possessions as the reward for their work, where other cultures may see material possessions as their right or their heritage. Americans tend to see material possessions as reward for their work. Americans do not have a problem with somebody buying something very, very expensive if they earned it. Americans do have a problem with somebody buying something very, very expensive if they didn't earn it. That's where they have a problem. So if the owner of Amazon decided to buy his own island, nobody's going to care, because they're like, well, he earned this money. He worked really hard for years and years and years. He built this company. Now if he can afford to buy this island, let him buy this island. You know, and if he didn't earn it, they would say like, oh no, that's not right. He can't do that. He can't just buy a whole island to himself. Yeah. So Americans value work. And again, they see materialism as appropriate reward for work. You work hard, you deserve it. You should have it. It's not a problem. So anyway, that's American sort of say cultural patterns. So does that make sense? You know, so as we looked right now at the Cole's observations about American culture, what Cole has done is he has outlined the major values of the American society, American people at large. It doesn't mean that every American is like that. It doesn't mean that every American embraces this value all the same. What he's saying is these are predominant factors that tend to be commonly found among most Americans, okay? And so this is what we call a cultural pattern, a cultural pattern. And what's we have to understand is that other cultures also have the same patterns. They're just different. They're just different patterns. And whether you can recognize or not, in your culture, there are cultural patterns just like that. Maybe not along the same lines, but they're cultural patterns. And just as American culture can be predictable by looking at these values, your culture can be predictable by looking at the unique values of your culture, whatever they may be. So if you learn enough about cultural patterns of another culture, you can be in a position to be able to anticipate or predict where people are going to go, which direction, sort of say, they're going to move with their values. And you can understand them better because you know what values they're operating in, what pattern of thinking they are engaging, how their behavior is this because, you know, these are the values they embrace. Looking at these cultural values of Americans, we understand why Americans are the way they are and why they behave the way they behave. Because these are the values that make them who they are. You know, why do Americans treat each other in a workplace like that? Because of these values. And don't get upset with people if they treat you like that, because they're being consistent with their values. They're not trying to be mean or rude, but you're trying to measure them by your own values, which they don't even know exist, honestly, because they live in their own world, in their own system of understanding of how things should work. All right, let's take a 10-minute break, then we'll come back and I'll try to wrap up the second part right here on other value orientations over here, okay? I've been talking for a while and I appreciate you guys jumping in on this conversation, but let's take a little break and then I'll come back. So 10 minutes, okay? And we'll wrap up.